The Hiding Place, Chapter 12, and this is the second part, or Part B. I'm going to read the last paragraph from the previous video so that we can catch up from where we were. The title of this chapter is Vught, and it is the name of a town in the Netherlands. So, here we go. Flames of fire seemed to leap around that name in my heart. I thought of Father's final hours, alone and confused, in a hospital corridor, of the underground work so abruptly halted. I thought of Mary Italy arrested while walking down a street, and I knew that if John Vogel stood in front of me now, I could kill him. Betsy drew the little cloth bag from beneath her overalls and held it out to me, but I shook my head. Betsy kept the Bible during the day, since she had more chance to read and teach from it here than I did at the Phillips barracks. In the evenings we held a clandestine prayer meeting for as many as could crowd around our bunk. "Do lead the prayers tonight, Betsy. I have a headache." More than a headache. All of me ached with the violence of my feelings about the man who had done us so much harm. That night I did not sleep, and the next day at my bench scarcely heard the conversation around me. By the end of the week I had worked myself into such a sickness of body and spirit that Mr. Moorman stopped at my bench to ask if something were wrong. Wrong! Yes, something's wrong, and I plunged into an account of that day. I was only too eager to tell Mr. Moorman and all Holland how John Vogel had betrayed his country. What puzzled me all this time was Betsy. She had suffered everything I had, and yet she seemed to carry no burden of rage. "Betsy," I hissed one dark night when I knew that my restless tossing must be keeping her awake. 3 of us now shared this single cot, as the crowded camp daily received new arrivals. "Betsy, don't you feel anything about John Vogel? Doesn't it bother you?" "Oh, yes, Corey, terribly. I felt for him ever since I knew, and I pray for him whenever his name comes into my mind. How dreadfully he must be suffering." For a long time I lay silent in the huge, shadowy barracks, restless with the sighs, snores, and stirrings of hundreds of women. Once again I had the feeling that this sister, with whom I had spent all my life, belonged somehow to another order of beings. Wasn't she telling me in her gentle way that I was as guilty as Jan Vogel? Didn't she and I stand together before an all-seeing God, convicted of the same sin of murder? Let me read that again. Didn't he and I stand together before an all-seeing God, convicted of the same sin of murder? For I had murdered him with my heart and with my tongue. "Jesus," I whispered into the lumpy ticking of the bed, "I forgive John Vogel, as I pray that you will forgive me. I have done him great damage. Bless him now and his family." That night, for the first time since our betrayer had a name, I slept deep and dreamlessly until the whistle summoned us to roll call. The days in Vught were a baffling mixture of good and bad. Morning roll call was often cruelly long. If the smallest rule had been broken, such as a single prisoner late for evening check-in, the entire barracks would be punished by 4 a.m. or even a 3:30 call, and made to stand at parade attention until our backs ached and our legs cramped. But the summer air was warm and alive with birds as the day approached. Gradually, in the east, a pink and gold sunrise would light the immense Brabant sky as Betsy and I squeezed each other's hands in awe. At 5:30 we had black bread and coffee, bitter and hot, and then fell into marching columns for the various work details. I looked forward to this hike to the Phillips factory. Part of the way we walked beside a small woods, separated only by a roll of barbed wire from a glistening world of dewdrops. We also marched past a section of the men's camp, many of our group straining to identify a husband or a son among the ranks of shaved heads and striped overalls. This was another of the paradoxes of Vught. I was endlessly, daily grateful to be again with people, but what I had not realized in solitary confinement was that to have companions meant to have their griefs as well. We all suffered with the women whose men were in this camp. The discipline in the male section was much harsher than in the women's. Executions were frequent. Almost every day a salvo of shots would send the anguished whispers flying. How many this time? Who were they? The woman next to me at the relay bench was an intense communist woman named Fleur. She and her husband had managed to get their 2 small children to friends before their arrest, but she worried aloud all day about them and about Mr. Fleur, who had tuberculosis. He worked on the rope-making crew in the compound next to Phillips, and each noon they managed to exchange a few words through the barbed wire separating the 2 enclosures. Although she was expecting a 3rd child in September, she would never eat her morning allotment of bread, but passed it through the fence to him. She was dangerously thin, I felt, for an expectant mother, and several times I brought her a portion of my own breakfast bread. But this, too, was always set aside for Mr. Fleur. And yet, in spite of sorrow and anxiety, and no one in that place was without both, there was laughter, too. In the Phillips barracks, an impersonation of the pompous, blustering second lieutenant, a game of blind man's bluff, a song passed in rounds from bench to bench until "Dick Clouds! Dick Clouds!" the signal might come from any bench that faced a window. The factory barracks was set in the center of the broad Phillips compound. There was no way a camp official could approach it without crossing this open space. In an instant every bench would be filled, the only sound the businesslike rattle of radio parts. One morning the code words were still being relayed down the long shed when a rather hefty Aufseherin stepped through the door. She glanced furiously about, face flushing scarlet as she applied "thick clouds" to her appearance. She shrieked and ranted for a quarter of an hour, then deprived us of our noontime break in the open air that day. After this, we adopted the more neutral signal, 15. I've assembled 15 dials. During the long, hot afternoons, pranks and talk died down as each one sat alone with his own thoughts. I scratched on the side of the table the number of days until September the 1st. There was nothing official about that date, just a chance remark by Mrs. Fleur to the effect that 6 months was the usual prison term for ration card offenders. Then, if that were the charge, and if they included the time served at Scheveningen, September 1st would be our release date. "Hurry," Betsy warned one evening when I announced triumphantly that August was half over. "We don't know for sure." I had the feeling, almost, that to Betsy it didn't matter. I looked at her, sitting on our cot in the last moments before lights out, sewing up a split seam in my overalls as she'd so often sat mending under the lamplight in the dining room. Betsy, by the very way she sat, evoked a high-backed chair behind her and a carpet at her feet instead of this endless row of metal cots on a bare pine floor. The first week we were there she had added extra hooks to the neck of her overalls so that she could fasten the collar high around her throat, and this, propriety taken care of, I had the feeling she was as content to be reading the Bible here in Vught to those who had never heard it as she'd been serving soup to hungry people in the hallway of the Baye. As for me, I set my heart every day more firmly on September 1. And then, all of a sudden, it looked as though we would not have to wait even this long. The Princess Irene Brigade was rumored to be in France, moving toward Belgium. The Brigade was part of the Dutch forces that had escaped to England during the 5-Day War. Now it was marching to reclaim its own. The guards were noticeably tense. Roll call was an agony. The old and the ill who were slow reaching their places were beaten mercilessly. Even the red light commando came in for discipline. These young women were ordinarily a favored group of prisoners, prostitutes, most from Amsterdam. They were imprisoned not for their profession, which was extolled as a patriotic duty, but for infecting German soldiers. Ordinarily, with the male guards anyway, they had a bold, breezy manner. Now even they had to form ruler straight lines and stand hours at frozen attention. The sound of the firing squad was heard more and more often. One lunchtime, when the bell sounded to return to work, Mrs. Fleur did not appear at the bench beside me. It always took a while for my eyes to readjust to the dim factory after the bright sun outside. It was only gradually that I saw the hunk of black bread still resting at her place on the bench. There had been no husband to deliver it to. And so, hanging between hope and horror, we waited out the days. Rumor was all we had to live on. The Brigade was across the Dutch border. The Brigade was destroyed. The Brigade had never landed. Women who had stayed away from the whispered little prayer service around our cot now crowded close, demanding signs and predictions from the Bible. On the morning of September 1, Mrs. Fleur gave birth to a baby girl. The child lived 4 hours. Several days later, we awoke to the sound of distant explosions. Long before the roll call whistle, the entire barracks was up and milling about in the dark between the cots. Was it bombs? Artillery fire? Surely the Brigade had reached Brabant. This very day they might be in Vught. The scowls and threats of the guards when they arrived daunted us not at all. Everyone's mind had turned homeward. Everyone talked of what she would do first. The plants will all be dead, said Betsy, but we'll get some cuttings from Norley. We'll wash the windows so the sun can come in. At the Phillips factory, Mr. Moorman tried to calm us. Those aren't bombs, he said, and certainly not guns. That's demolition work. Germans. They're probably blowing up bridges. It means they expect an attack, but not that it's here. It might not come for weeks. This dampened us a bit, but as the blast came closer and closer, nothing could keep down hope. Now they were so near they hurt our ears. Drop your lower jaw, Mr. Mormon called down the long room. Keep your mouth open and it will save your eardrums. We had our midday meal inside with the doors and windows closed. We'd been working again for an hour, or sitting at our benches. No one could work. When the order came to return to dormitories. With sudden urgency, women embraced husbands and sweethearts who worked beside them at Phillips. Betsy was waiting for me outside our barracks. Corey, has the brigade come? Are we free? No, not yet. I don't know. Oh, Betsy, why am I so frightened? The loudspeaker in the men's camp was sounding the signal for roll call. No order was given here, and we drifted about aimlessly, listening we scarcely knew for what. Names were being read through the men's speaker, though it was too far away to make them out. And suddenly, an insane fear gripped the waiting women. A death-like silence now hung over both sides of the vast camp. The loudspeaker had fallen silent. We exchanged wordless looks. We almost feared to breathe. Then, rifle fire split the air. Around us, women began to weep. A second volley, a third. For 2 hours the executions went on. Someone counted. More than 700 male prisoners were killed that day. There was little sleeping in our barracks that night and no roll call the following morning. About 6 a.m. we were ordered to collect our personal things. Betsy and I put our belongings into the pillowcases we had brought from Scheveningen. Toothbrushes, needles and thread, a small bottle of Dividamon oil that had come in a Red Cross package, Gnarly's blue sweater, which was the only thing we had brought with us when we left the quarantine camp 10 weeks before. I transferred the Bible in its bag from Betsy's back to my own. She was so thin it made a visible bump between her shoulders. We were marched to a field where soldiers were passing out blankets from the backs of open trucks. As we filed past, Betsy and I drew 2 beautiful soft new ones. Mine was white with blue stripes, Betsy's white with red stripes, obviously the property of some well-to-do family. About noon the exodus from camp began. Through the drab streets of barracks we went, past the bunkers, through the maze of barbed wire compounds and enclosures, and at last on to the rough dirt road through the woods down which we had stumbled that rainy night in June. Betsy hung hard onto my arm. She was laboring for breath, as she always did when we had to walk any distance. March! Schnell! Double time! I slipped my arm beneath Betsy's shoulders and half carried her the final quarter mile. At last the path ended and we lined up facing the single track. Over 1,000 women standing toe to heel. Farther along, the men's section was also at the siding. It was impossible to identify individuals among the shaved heads glistening in the autumn sun. At first, I thought our train had not come. Then I realized that these freight cars standing on the tracks were for us. Already the men were being prodded aboard, clambering up over the high sides. We could not see the engine, just this row of small, high-wheeled European boxcars stretching out of sight in both directions, machine guns mounted at intervals on the roof. Soldiers were approaching along the track, pausing at each car to haul open the heavy sliding door. In front of us, a gaping black interior appeared. Women began to press forward. Clutching our blankets and pillowcases, we were swept along with the others. Betsy's chest was still heaving oddly after the rapid march. I had to boost her over the side of the train. At first I could make out nothing in the dark car. Then in a corner I saw a tall, uneven shape. It was a stack of bread, dozens of flat black loaves piled one on top of another. A long trip, then. The small car was getting crowded. We were shoved against the back wall. 30 or 40 people were all that could fit in, and still the soldiers drove women over the side, cursing, jabbing with their guns. Shrieks rose from the center of the car, but still the press increased. It was only when 80 women were packed inside that the door thumped shut, and we heard iron bolts driven into place. Women were sobbing, and many fainted, although in the tight wedged crowd they remained upright. Just when it seemed certain that those in the middle must suffocate or be trampled to death, we worked out a kind of system where, by half sitting, half lying with our legs wedged around one another, like members of a sledding team, we were able to get down on the floor of the car. Do you know what I'm thankful for? Betsy's gentle voice startled me in the squirming madhouse. I'm thankful that Father is in heaven today. Father, yes. Oh, Father, how could I have wept for you? The warm sun beat down on the motionless train. The temperature in the packed car rose. The air grew foul. Beside me, someone was tugging at a nail in the ancient wood of the wall. At last it came free. With the point, she set to work gouging the hole wider. Others around the sides took up the idea, and in a while, blessed whiffs of outside air began to circle about us. It was hours before the train gave a sudden lurch and began to move. Almost at once it stopped again, then again crawled forward. The rest of the day and into the night it was the same, stopping, starting, slamming, jerking. Once, when it was my turn at the air hole, I saw in the moonlight trainmen carrying a length of twisted rail. Tracks ahead must be destroyed. I passed the news. Maybe they would not be able to repair them. Maybe we would still be in Holland when liberation came. Betsy's forehead was hot to my hand. The red light girl, between whose legs I was wedged, squeezed herself into an even tighter crouch, so that Betsy could lie almost flat across my lap. I dozed too, from time to time, my head on the shoulder of the friendly girl behind us. Once, I dreamed, it was storming. I could hear the hailstones on Tante Jance's front windows. I opened my eyes. It really was hailing. I could hear it rattling against the side of the car. Everyone was awake now and talking. Another storm of hail. And then we heard a burst of machine gun fire from the roof of the train. It's bullets! Someone shouted. They're attacking the train! Again we heard that sound like tiny stones striking the wall, and again the machine guns answered. Had the brigada reached us at last? The firing died away. For an hour the train sat motionless. Then, slowly, we crawled forward. At dawn, someone called out that we were passing through the border town of Emmerich. We had arrived in Germany. And that is the end of chapter 12. The next chapter is Ravensbrück, where the rest of the story plays itself out. Ravensbrück was one of the worst prisoner camps. Not as bad as Auschwitz, but Ravensbrück came in second. And then there was Dachau, which is also in Germany. But I will tell you that I love this book. Don't you like it? Don't you love it? Okay, so we are finished with the easy part of the story. When we get to Ravensbrück, there may be some things that you may not be comfortable with. And if that's the case, then just fast forward a little bit and pass that part and pick it up in a little bit. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you his peace. Shalom.